Somewhere in Seoul tonight, a woman is standing in a $4.7 million closet, and she is shaking, not because of what she has, because of what she just found out. This channel goes where money has already tried to go first, to buy the silence, seal the record, and make sure you never hear the name. Subscribe right now, hit the like button, then sit down, because this one starts in 10 seconds. She is standing in a closet worth $4.7 million, and she is shaking, not from cold, not from fear, from a specific full-body trembling of a person who has just understood, completely, finally, with no corner of doubt remaining, that the life surrounding her was never built for her. It was built around her, the way a frame is built around something that isn't going anywhere. Her name is Adaeze Okonkwo-Shin, 36 years old. Her husband's net worth is 4.1 trillion Korean won. Her own front door opens with a code she has never been given. 38 days since she walked on a pavement. 38 days since she chose a direction and simply moved in it. 38 days inside a penthouse on the 31st floor of the most expensive residential address in Hanam-dong. A building where the lobby staff know her face and have been quietly, professionally, consistently instructed never to let her leave unaccompanied. 38 days surrounded by $4.7 million worth of the most beautiful things money can assemble. And not one single thing she asked for. And 3 weeks ago, in a hospital in Sinshin, in a room that smelled of recycled air and something quietly being finished, a woman Adaeze had never met took her hand across a bed blanket. A Korean woman, early 40s, beautiful once in a way that illness had not completely undone. The structure of it still present beneath everything the last 18 months had done to her face. Her name was Park Soo-yeon, and she had been waiting through 6 years of legally enforced silence, through the specific exhaustion of a person who has held their breath far longer than breath was ever meant to be held, waiting for the woman who came after her. She had been Shin Jae-won's wife. Before Adaeze, 5 years of marriage, so completely erased from every public record, every professional biography, every casual conversation in every room Jae-won had ever occupied, that the men who had worked directly beside him for a decade genuinely, completely, did not know she had existed. She had also built a foundation. She had also discovered what it was being used for. She had also, on one ordinary evening at one ordinary dinner table, placed a document in front of the man she married and waited for him to respond. And she had also watched him cut his food. Chew, swallow, fold the paper once, put it in his jacket pocket, pick up his chopsticks, continue. She had also tried to leave. She did not make it. I need to stop here. Comment right now. And I need you to be completely honest with yourself before you answer. If a dying woman, someone who had been legally silenced for 6 years, someone who had already paid the full price that Adaeze was about to pay, pulled you close and told you everything, would you use what she gave you? Or would you decide that surviving was enough and walk away clean? Drop your answer below. Like this video if you already know which one you would choose. Because Adaeze's answer is not the easy one. And it is the reason this story exists at all. Now back to the closet. Back to the trembling. Back to the woman who just decided not to run, not to fight loudly, not to do anything fast enough for Shin Jae-won's 31 lawyers to catch, contain, reframe, and file under the behavior of an unstable woman. She decided to move like water. Slow, patient, finding every crack before the crack became visible, and what she had already built over the 3 years before this moment. Quietly, completely invisibly, inside the very structure he constructed to keep her silent, was something a man with 4.1 trillion won and 31 lawyers and a private psychiatric consultant had never once thought to look for. Because it was not in the penthouse. It was not behind a biometric door. It was not anywhere near him or anything he had ever thought to protect. It was in school libraries, in the hands of children, across 3 countries, hidden inside the dedication pages of books written by a retired literature teacher in Enugu, who believed, with his whole quiet life, that the most dangerous thing you can give another human being is the ability to read. To understand how Adaeze Okonkwo arrived in that closet on that morning, to understand the full architecture of what she had built and what she had survived and what it cost her and what it ultimately meant, we have to go back. Not to the penthouse, not to Seoul, not even to the beginning of the marriage. We have to go back to Enugu, Nigeria, in 1987, to a compound on a quiet residential street where a girl grew up between 2 people who understood the world in completely opposite ways and absorbed something essential from each of them. Adaeze Okonkwo was the second of 4 children. Her mother, Chidinma, ran a textile importing business, a woman who had built it from a single stall in Ogbit Market through a combination of commercial instinct, physical endurance, and a specific skill of reading people before they finished their opening sentence. Chidinma negotiated in Igbo, in English, in the particular body language of someone who has been underestimated so many times that she has learned to use it as a tool. She was loud, direct, commercially brilliant, and held opinions about everything with a grip that no argument had ever successfully loosened. Her father, Emeka, was the opposite of everything Chidinma was. He was a secondary school literature teacher who moved through the world at the specific, unhurried pace of a man who believed, genuinely and without performance, that most problems resolve themselves if you gave them enough patient attention and honest thought. He cooked on Sundays. He listened more than he spoke. He was the kind of man who remembered what you said 3 weeks ago and brought it back gently when it became relevant, which made the people around him feel consistently, quietly known. And he read, constantly, voraciously, every genre, every subject, every author he could find on the roadside sellers on Ogwe Road or in a university bookshop, or borrowed from colleagues, or ordered in battered condition through a postal system that was not always reliable, but was always eventually. And every book he owned, every single one without exception, from his university economics textbooks to the Nigerian novels to the second-hand thrillers with broken spines he bought for 50 naira on the roadside, had a dedication written in his careful, precise handwriting inside the front cover. Not the publisher's dedication, his own, a private message to whoever would hold this book next. Sometimes a line of poetry, sometimes a question he wanted the next reader to carry into the story. Sometimes just a date and a single word that meant something he did not need to explain because the right reader would understand it without explanation. Remember, begin, listen. It was Emeka's belief, demonstrated daily but never stated directly, because that was precisely who he was, that a book without a human inscription was just paper, that the dedication page was where the real conversation lived, between the person who had held the book before and the person holding it now. A thread across time, evidence that someone had been here, had thought about this, had wanted you to know. Adaeze absorbed this the way children absorb the things their parents do without explaining, without knowing she was absorbing it, without knowing, for many years, what she would eventually do with it. She was exceptional in school in the specific way that does not make teachers comfortable. Not the loudness of performance, not the eagerness of the student who needs to be seen, but the quietness of someone who listens at a frequency that most people don't access and processes what they hear at a depth that only becomes visible when they eventually choose to speak. Her economics teachers at University of Nigeria in Nsukka used the phrase structural intuition in her recommendation letters, the rare ability to see where a system would crack before the system itself revealed the crack. She graduated with a first-class degree. She was 23 years old. She had 3 job offers before her final results were even posted. She turned all 3 down within 48 hours. Not because they weren't good opportunities, because she had already decided that what she needed could not be found inside any of them. What Adaeze needed. And this is something she articulated only once, years later, in the single interview she ever gave about any of this, was proximity to the real machinery. Not the textbook version of how economies worked. Not the sanitized view from the middle of a legitimate corporate career. The actual machinery. How decisions that affected millions of people were made in rooms that held 12 men. How money moved before it was supposed to move. How power arranged itself when it thought nobody who would write about it was watching. She arrived at Yonsei University in Seoul on a postgraduate scholarship at 24 years old. She had taught herself functional Korean from recordings and textbooks over the preceding 18 months because she had decided, before she ever booked her flight, that she would not arrive somewhere new and be dependent on anyone else's translation of what was being said around her. She was one of 3 international students in her cohort. She was the only one who argued with a professor in Korean by month 9. She met Shin Jae-won at a business forum in the spring of 2013. A reception following a panel discussion on Korean infrastructure investment in emerging markets. The kind of event where the real conversations happen not on the stage, but at the edges of the room, between people who already know each other and are deciding what the panel just confirmed about something they were already thinking. Jae-won was 44 years old. He was not the largest person in the room. He was not the loudest. He did not work the space the way that men who need to be seen work a space. Circulating, performing, collecting. He stood in one place and let the room come to him. And it did. Because Shin Jae-won had a quality that is genuinely difficult to describe to someone who has not been in a room with it. Not confidence. Confidence implies an awareness of the possibility of failure, an awareness that you are performing certainty against the background of uncertainty. This was something further than that. The absolute, cellular architectural certainty of a man who had not experienced a consequence he did not specifically choose in so long that the concept of uncontrolled outcomes had become theoretically interesting rather than personally relevant. He spoke to Adaeze for 50 minutes. She would think afterward in her apartment with a glass of water and a very still mind, the most structurally intelligent man she had ever met. The kind of mind that was not just 3 moves ahead in the conversation, but had already modeled the conversation's possible endings before it began and was simply guiding it toward the one he had already chosen. What she did not understand yet, what would take her years to fully understand, was that she was doing exactly the same thing from the other side of the conversation. She called her mother that night. Chidinma answered on the second ring, the way she always did, as if she had been specifically expecting this particular call. Adaeze described Jae-won, his intelligence, his stillness, the way the room oriented itself around him without his requesting it. There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer. Adaeze, Chidinma said finally, I don't know this man, but I know the way you're describing him. And you have never described anyone the way you are describing him right now. Is that not a good thing? Adaeze asked. It means you've already decided, her mother said. Not unkindly, just directly, the way Chidinma did everything. And you're calling me for permission rather than counsel. Those are 2 different things. Adaeze was quiet for a moment. Come home first, Chidinma said, before anything happens. Come home and let me look at your face. Adaeze did not go home first. She did not let her mother look at her face. She married Shin Jae-won 14 months later in a ceremony on Jeju Island, the island his mother came from, the island of the Haenyeo, the traditional female divers who had been descending into cold water without equipment for centuries and surfacing with what they went down for, and doing it again the next day and the day after that, because that was simply what the women of Jeju did and had always done. His mother's name was Shin Bok-soon, 70 years old at the time of the wedding. Former haenyeo, a woman whose body had the specific density of someone who has spent decades in cold water. Compact, contained, with a stillness that was not emptiness but compressed force, the stillness of something at rest that has learned it does not need to announce its strength. Chidinma flew in from Enugu. She smiled in every photograph. She did not stop watching her daughter's face for a single moment of the entire day. The early years of the marriage were not what Adaeze had expected. They were better. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly, surprisingly better. Jae-won was a remarkable intellectual companion. He argued with her ideas rather than around them. He brought her into rooms she would never have accessed otherwise. Rooms where the real decisions were made, where the real machinery was visible, exactly the proximity she had come to Seoul to find. Their conversations at dinner ran past midnight and into the kind of territory that neither of them could access with anyone else, the specific pleasure of being fully met by another mind. He listened to her, not performatively, actually. And in year 2, when Adaeze told him she wanted to build an education foundation, girls' literacy and STEM access, operating across both Nigeria and South Korea simultaneously, the first initiative of its kind to genuinely bridge both countries rather than simply franchise a Western model into African classrooms. He sat across the table and listened to the entire proposal from beginning to end without interrupting once. Then he said, "Build it. I will fund it properly." She built it. She named it after a line her father had written inside a copy of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Purple Hibiscus, a dedication he had inscribed before giving it to a student whose name Adaeze never knew, a student who had sent Emeka a letter 23 years later saying that the book, and specifically what was written inside the front cover, had changed the direction of her life. The foundation was real. The programs were real. The curriculum was designed over 18 months with educators in Lagos and Seoul simultaneously, built specifically for the context it would actually operate in rather than adapted from something designed for somewhere else. The girls it served were real. The money flowing through was not. It is a Thursday evening in February 2021. Adaeze is in a hospital room in Sinshin. The room smells of antiseptic and the particular staleness of air that has been recycled too many times in a space where windows are not designed to open. The fluorescent light above is slightly too bright in the specific way of medical lighting, designed for visibility rather than comfort, indifferent to both. Across from her, propped against 2 pillows in a hospital bed that seems too large for what illness has made of her, is a Korean woman in her early 40s. She was beautiful once, not in the way of someone who worked at it, but in the way of someone whose specific combination of features simply landed that way, the kind of beauty that photographs well without effort. Illness has not erased this. It has reduced the volume of it. The structure is still present underneath. Her name is Park Soo-yeon, and Adaeze is here because 3 days ago, a nurse from his hospital called her personal phone, the monitored phone, the phone that routes through J1's security team, and said only that a patient had been asking for her by name and had asked that she come alone and that she come soon. The nurse had said she does not have much time. Adaeze had told J1's security coordinator that she needed to see her doctor for a routine appointment. She had been permitted to go with a driver. She had asked the driver to wait in the parking structure. He had agreed because she had been calm and specific and had never before given anyone in the building a reason to believe she was capable of doing anything other than exactly what she said she was doing. Soo-yeon speaks slowly. Adaeze follows her Korean with the full concentrated attention of someone who learned the language as a deliberate act of will and uses it now as an act of survival. Soo-yeon tells her she was Jae-won's wife. Between 2011 and 2016, 5 years. A marriage that ended with a non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive, covering not just the terms of separation, but the existence of the marriage itself, the existence of the meetings, the existence of the woman. That's Soo-Yun's own sister, sitting in the corridor outside right now. Had not known the full terms until this morning when Soo-Yun had called her attorney and asked him to come to the hospital and had told him that she was exercising the mortality clause she had insisted on, including in the agreement 6 years ago. The clause that said, "When I am dying, I am no longer bound by this." Her attorney had argued with her for 40 minutes. She had waited for him to finish. Then she had said, "Call whoever you need to call. I am done waiting." She tells Adaeze that she also built a foundation, an arts education program. Jae-won funded it. It operated across 4 Korean cities. She tells Adaeze that she discovered, in the 3rd year of their marriage, that the foundation was processing approximately 40 billion won annually through false donation receipts. Money from construction kickbacks, paid by government procurement officials who received, in return, placement on the Shin Construction Group preferred contractor list, a list that existed nowhere officially and everywhere practically. She tells Adaeze that she confronted him at dinner with a document. She tells Adaeze exactly what happened next. And as Soo-Yun describes the dinner, the chopsticks, the chewing, the folding, the pocket, the silence. Adaeze is sitting completely still in the plastic chair because she is recognizing something with the specific disorientation of a person who is hearing the story of their own future described as someone else's past. Soo-Yun tells her that after the dinner, things changed gradually. First, her personal phone was replaced. Then her closest friend, a woman she had known since university, stopped returning her calls. Soo-Yun later discovered that Jae-won had spoken to the woman's husband, who worked in a sector where Jae-won's goodwill was professionally significant. Then her housekeeper was dismissed. Then her access to their shared financial accounts was restructured. Then, when she was sufficiently isolated, when there was no one left in her immediate world who was not in some way connected to or dependent on Jae-won, he arranged for a psychiatric assessment. The assessment described Park Soo-Yun as experiencing a delusional episode, characterized by paranoid ideation, unfounded accusations against her spouse arising from a period of significant personal instability. She was admitted to a private facility in Gyeonggi Province. She was there for 73 days. When she came out, the non-disclosure agreement was on the table. Her own attorney, one she had chosen herself, one she had believed was independent, had been in conversation with Jae-won's team 3 days before she was discharged. She signed because she had nowhere to go, because the world she had inhabited had been carefully, systematically, patiently reduced to the size of a room she could not leave without his permission, because Jae-won's attorney had explained, with the specific calm of a man who does this regularly and has never once needed to raise his voice to be effective, what the alternative to signing looked like. She had signed, and she had waited 6 years for the woman who came after her. Soo-Yun reaches out and takes Adaeze's hand. "I waited," she says quietly, the Korean coming slowly, carefully, with the precision of someone conserving energy for what matters most. 6 years, I waited for someone to tell. Someone who was already inside. Someone he could not reach before I could reach them first. She looks at Adaeze with the absolute directness of a person who has nothing left to protect. "I chose you," she says, "because you're the only one who already has the proof. You just have not understood yet that you have been building it." Adaeze sits with that sentence for a long moment. Then she asks Soo-Yun what she means, and Soo-Yun tells her about a pattern she had noticed during her 3 years of isolation before the facility. The way that the most dangerous thing Jae-won feared was not confrontation. He was completely equipped for confrontation, had 31 lawyers whose entire existence was organized around making confrontation irrelevant. The most dangerous thing he feared was documentation he couldn't find. Documents in places he hadn't thought to look. Evidence in systems that operated outside his direct field of awareness. You have a foundation, Soo-Hyun says. You have access. You have a father who you trust and who trusts you. And you have been in that apartment for long enough to know where everything is. She tightens her hand slightly around Adaeze. You are already inside the archive, she says. You just need to build the library. Adaeze drives back to the penthouse in the car that belongs to J1's security team. She sits in the back seat. She watches Seoul move past the tinted windows, the city in its afternoon motion. People going places they have chosen to go, turning in directions nobody has approved for them, moving through a world that is simply open in the way that the world is open to people who are not Adaeze right now. She thinks about her father. She thinks about his shelves. She thinks about the dedications. The thread across time, between the person who held the book before and the person holding it now. Evidence that someone was here. Evidence that someone wanted you to know. And sitting in the back of a car that is not hers, returning to a building she cannot leave without permission, Adaeze Okonkwo-Shin begins to understand what she is going to do. I need to stop here for just one moment, because what Park Soo-Hyun just told Adaeze in that hospital room, that is the seed of everything that comes next. And what Adaeze builds over the following 18 months, from inside the penthouse, using tools J1 himself provided, in spaces he had never thought to watch, is why I spent 5 weeks on this before I was ready to record a single word. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Like this video. Hit the notification bell, because this community is exactly why stories like this one get told at all. Back to Adaeze. She has 45 minutes in the back of this car. She does not waste a single one of them. Here is what has never been reported in any coverage of this story. Not in the Korean press when it finally broke. Not in the Nigerian outlets that covered the settlement. Not in the international legal analysis that circulated afterward. Adaeze did not go home that evening and begin moving documents. She went home and called her father. Not her mother. Her father. Emeka, retired now, living in the same Enugu compound, still reading, still writing in front covers, still moving through the world at the specific, unhurried pace of a man who has spent his entire life believing that patience is not the absence of urgency, but the intelligent application of it. She called him on the monitored phone. She spoke to him in Igbo. She told him, in the careful elliptical register of someone who understands that every word of this conversation is being reviewed, that she was thinking of doing something special for the Foundation's partner schools in Nigeria. Special editions of some of the Foundation's core titles, with handwritten dedications inside, personal from the Foundation's director. Hundreds of them. She wanted her father to help coordinate the distribution through his contacts at the university and the secondary schools he had spent 30 years working with. There was silence on the line. Not a surprised silence. Not a confused silence. The silence of a man who has been listening carefully his entire life and has just heard, underneath the words, what is actually being said. How many books? He said finally. As many as it takes, Adaeze said. Over the following 14 months, Adaeze photographed documents. Not in the penthouse. Never in the penthouse, where J1's security team conducted sweeps twice daily, and where every device was monitored, and where she had understood from the first week of the lockdown that privacy was a concept that existed here only as decoration. In the Foundation's satellite office in Seoul, a small space, 2 rooms for staff, a meeting table that Adaeze was permitted to visit twice monthly as the organization's nominal director. She was accompanied each time by a member of the security team who waited in the reception area. She was permitted 1 hour. The visits were logged. What is not logged was this. During each visit, she borrowed a phone from one of the foundation's administrative staff, a young woman named June who had worked with the foundation since its founding and who knew Adaeze well enough to hand over her personal phone without asking why when Adaeze said quietly, once on a Tuesday in March, "I need to check a document format. My phone is playing up. May I borrow yours for a few minutes?" June handed it over. Adaeze went to the small internal meeting room. She photographed documents from J1's corporate files. Files she had memorized the location and contents of over 3 years of living in proximity to his work. Documents she had photographed previously in the Penthouse study during the 40-minute window between the 6 a.m. security sweep and J1's 7 a.m. attorney call. On a secondary phone she kept inside the lining of a coat in the closet. She uploaded the images to a server in Lagos that her father had set up in his study in Enugu, using instructions she had transmitted to him through the coded correspondence system they had been developing for 6 months. She returned June's phone within 7 minutes. June never knew what had been uploaded from it. 712 photographs, across 14 months, each one transmitted by her father, carefully, painstakingly, with the attention of a man who has spent his whole life understanding that the details are where meaning lives, to a specific location inside a specific book from the Foundation's catalog. Not digitally embedded, not in metadata. Physically, her father wrote the coordinates, page number, line number, character position, into the dedication pages of the Foundation's books in his own handwriting. Part of the message, invisible to anyone who did not have the key, indistinguishable to any eye that did not know what it was looking for, from the warm and slightly literary inscriptions that the Foundation's director had always written into every book it distributed. Because she always had, from the very beginning, before any of this. Because that was who Adaeze Okonkwo was, the daughter of a man who believed that the dedication page was where the real conversation lived. The books were shipped to partner school libraries in Nigeria, in Ghana, and in South Korea as part of the Foundation's regular quarterly distribution. Librarians signed for them, shelved them, sent the Foundation a receipt of delivery. 712 books, distributed across 3 countries, sitting on shelves, in the hands of children, containing the complete financial architecture of Shin Construction Group's government contract kickback network across 14 years. And nobody knew, in October 2021, while this was underway, while the 712th book was still months from being printed, Shin Bok-soon arrived at the Penthouse. No announcement, no preparation. A call from the lobby at 9 in the morning. Your mother-in-law is here. J1 was in Busan. He had not mentioned his mother's visit. Bok-soon, when Adaeze met her in the lobby and embraced her with the warmth that the situation required, simply said that she had been thinking of coming for a while and had decided that today was the day. She had brought food from Jeju. She had brought nothing else. They spent a week together. J1, reached in Busan, was informed of his mother's visit and expressed neither surprise nor particular interest. He would be back at the end of the week. Bok-soon cooked every evening. The food was extraordinary, the specific excellence of someone who has done something so many times and with so much care that the skill has become inseparable from the person. They ate at the marble table, the $88,000 slab of Italian marble at which Adaeze had slid a document in front of J1 18 months ago, and they talked. Not about J1, about Jeju, about the sea, about what it means to descend into cold water with no equipment, no tank, no mechanism between your body and the ocean, and to trust yourself to surface. The Hainyo who panic, Bok-soon said on the second evening, setting down her chopsticks with the deliberate care of someone about to say something she has been carrying for a while, are not the ones who are afraid. Fear is normal. Fear is correct. The ocean is larger than you. It is stronger than you. It will always be stronger than you. She looked at Adaeze. The ones who panic are the ones who fight it, who think that force will answer force. The water does not negotiate. If you fight it, it takes you. The ones who survive, she said quietly, understand that going down and coming up are one continuous movement. You do not resist the descent. You use the descent. You let it carry you to the bottom, and you trust that your body knows how to bring you back. Adaeze held this. Bok-soon picked up her chopsticks, continued eating, and said nothing more about it. On the fourth night of the visit, Adaeze was in the study when she heard Bok-soon on the phone in the kitchen. She was not eavesdropping. The study door was open. The kitchen was 12 meters away. The apartment was quiet enough that sound carried. She caught fragments. A name. Soo-yeon. Shin. Bok-soon had always known about the first wife. Adaeze did not go to the kitchen. She sat in the study for a moment with this new weight, and she added it to the map she had been building in her mind. The map of what was true, the map of who knew what, the map of where the cracks in Jaewon's architecture actually ran. Then she went to her desk, added 3 more books to her father's distribution list, and said nothing. On the last morning of the visit, Bok-soon held Adaeze's face in both hands at the door. The specific gesture of an older Korean woman to a younger one, formal and intimate simultaneously, a gesture that requires being looked at directly and looking directly back. She held it for a moment longer than the gesture required. She did not say anything. She left. 3 weeks after Bok-soon's departure, the housekeeper, Mrs. Park, was dismissed. No notice. No reason given. No transition period. Jaewon's assistant handled it while Adaeze was in the study. She heard the conversation from the hallway, came to the kitchen doorway to find Mrs. Park, 61 years old, 20 years in domestic service, 11 of them in this household, standing very still with the specific expression of someone absorbing a shock they're not going to allow themselves to visibly react to. Mrs. Park finished preparing Adaeze's afternoon tea, brought it to the study, set it down, looked at Adaeze for one moment with the full directness of a woman who has something to say and understands that she will not be permitted to say it. Put her hand briefly over Adaeze's hand, went to the hallway, put on her coat, left. And here is where this story asks the hardest question it has. Because in the weeks that followed Mrs. Park's dismissal, isolated, monitored, reduced to the penthouse, and twice-monthly foundation visits and phone calls to Enugu that she knew were reviewed and assessed, Adaeze made choices that do not sit cleanly. She did not contact Soo-yeon's sister with what she knew. She did not go to any authority. She did not warn the foundation staff or the partner schools or the procurement officials whose names appeared in her father's books. She kept her face completely neutral at every dinner, every security check-in, every monitored phone call, every twice-monthly foundation visit. She allowed the machine to continue. She watched it continue, and she documented it continuing. By every clean standard of morality, by the clear, unambiguous measure of what is right. This is complicated. She knew what the foundation was doing. She continued to publicly represent it. She continued to be the human face of a mechanism she now understood completely. And there's no entirely comfortable way to sit with that. And yet, the woman who had tried to move quickly, Park Soo-yeon, who had gathered what she had and confronted Jaewon before she was ready and before her evidence was irrefutable and before she had any architecture outside his system to land in, had spent 73 days in a private psychiatric facility, had signed a document that cost her 6 years, had died without seeing a single consequence reach him. Speed, in Jaewon's world, was precisely what he was built to absorb and neutralize. He had 31 lawyers whose entire professional existence was organized around making speed irrelevant, around catching fast-moving things and stopping them before they reached light. Adaeze had learned, from someone who moved too fast, that the only movement Jae-won's architecture could not respond to was movement that happened below his field of awareness. She chose to move like water, down and up as one movement, using the descent, the way Bok-soon had described. In January 2022, a journalist named Yemi Choi received a package at her apartment in Seoul. Yemi Choi was 31 years old, Korean-Nigerian dual national. Her father Korean, her mother Yoruba, raised between Seoul and Lagos in the specific cultural bilingualism of someone who has never been fully legible to either place and has learned to use that illegibility as a professional asset. She had been working as an investigative journalist for 6 years, the last 2 of which she had spent tracking the contract acquisition patterns of Shin Construction Group, following the money from procurement announcements through shell entities, through international transfers back to the officials whose names never appeared on anything and whose bank accounts nonetheless reflected the outcomes of decisions they were supposed to make impartially. She had the structure of the story. She had no source willing to speak on record. She had been close twice, and both times the source had gone quiet in ways that suggested the conversation had been noted by someone who was not Yemi. The package had no return address. Inside was a single children's book, a foundation edition, the hand-stamped logo on the spine, the distinctive cover design, the specific dimensions of the book's Adaeze Foundation distributed to partner schools. Inside the front cover, in handwriting that Yemi did not yet recognize, was a dedication. Warm, literary, the kind of message a thoughtful educator might write inside a book she was sending to a school. And at the very bottom, below the signature, below the date, in characters so small they were almost invisible, a number, a routing number, and a key. Yemi called her editor in Lagos at 1:47 in the morning. Her editor, who had been working with Yemi long enough to know that a call at this hour meant something real, answered on the first ring. Yemi read the key aloud. Her editor called their legal team. The legal team reviewed the routing number and what it connected to. Called back in 28 minutes. "We need all of them," they said. "How many are there?" Yemi asked. 712, the legal team said. It took 11 days. 11 days of Yemi and 3 colleagues traveling to partner school libraries in Nigeria, in Ghana, and across South Korea. Walking into school libraries with the Foundation's catalog list, locating each title, opening the front cover, photographing the dedication page, and cross-referencing the coordinates embedded in her father's handwriting against the financial documents they pointed to. 712 books. 712 dedication pages, 712 locations in Jae-won's financial architecture, documented, cross-referenced, time-stamped, and assembled into an evidentiary record that was, by the time Yemi's legal team had finished reviewing it, the most comprehensive documentation of construction sector procurement corruption in Korean corporate history. Every book accounted for, every dedication legible, every thread traceable. Jae-won's team discovered the breach on a Wednesday morning. His lead financial attorney called him in Busan, where he was reviewing documentation for Shin Construction Group's 41st consecutive government contract bid. The attorney said, "The evidence was never in the penthouse." There was silence on the line. "Where was it?" Jae-won said. The attorney told him. Jae-won sat in his hotel room in Busan. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "How long?" 14 months of active transmission. 3 years of preparation before that. "And the books," he said slowly. "Who has them now?" "Libraries," his attorney said. "School libraries. In Nigeria, Ghana, and South Korea. There is no legal mechanism that moves fast enough to remove evidence from school library shelves across 3 countries before a journalist who has spent 11 days locating and photographing all 712 copies and has the complete key and has submitted the package to her publication's legal team and received clearance to publish. Publishes. Jae-won understood this. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed with his hands clasped and his elbows on his knees, and he looked at the floor of a room in Busan for a long time. And then he called his attorney back, and he said, "Find out who helped her." They found out. It was her father, a retired literature teacher in Enugu, a man who had spent his entire working life writing dedications into the front covers of books he was passing forward to the next person who would hold them. Jae-won's attorney reported this finding in a document that is part of the sealed legal record and has never been publicly released. The document contains one line, attributed to Shin Jae-won, recorded by the attorney as a direct quotation. It says, "She used the books for words from a man who had 31 lawyers and 4.1 trillion won, and had spent 20 years building a system specifically designed to be airtight. She used the books." 3 days before the investigation published, Yemi Choi received a second call, an elderly Korean woman. She gave her name as Shin Bok-soon. She said she had a statement she wished to be included in the article. Yemi asked if she had legal representation. Bok-soon said she did not require legal representation. She said she had been a haenyeo for 50 years. She said that the one thing the sea teaches you, above strength, above technique, above everything that can be practiced and refined, is that you cannot hold your breath forever. "I've been holding mine," she said, "for 11 years. Shin Bok-soon's statement was included in the published investigation. Attributed by name. Voluntary. Uncoerced. It confirmed the existence of the first marriage. Confirmed that she had known about the non-disclosure agreement. Confirmed that she had, for 11 years, carried this knowledge and said nothing, and that she understood what her silence had cost Park Soo-yeon. It ended with one sentence. In her own words, "I failed to protect the woman my son married the first time. I will not fail the second time." She was not subpoenaed. She was not pressured. She was not offered anything in exchange. She called a journalist from a payphone on a cliff road in Jeju Island on a Thursday morning because she had held her breath for 11 years and her body, like every haenyeo body, had simply reached the point where surfacing was not a choice but a necessity. Jae-won's own mother, the haenyeo, the woman who had spent 50 years descending into cold water and returning with what she went down for. She surfaced with everything. Before I tell you how this ends, comment right now. 3 options. A Jae-won's team moved fast enough, filed successfully in every jurisdiction. The publication was injuncted. The books were recalled. Adaeze was returned to the Penthouse, and the story dissolved quietly, the way these stories usually dissolve. B. The article ran. Everything collapsed. 9 officials faced consequences. Jae-won faced consequences. The system broke in the way that systems sometimes, rarely, actually break. C. The real ending is more complicated than either of those. The real ending is the version that was sealed, that was kept out of public record, that raises a question neither side wanted formally asked, and it came from someone nobody in that courtroom anticipated. Drop your answer below. Like this video, if this story has taken you somewhere you did not expect to go, do not skip forward, because the actual ending of this story requires you to have heard everything you just heard. The investigation published simultaneously in Lagos and Seoul on April 7th, 2022. 8,400 words. 9 officials named. 14 years of contract data. The complete financial routing of a system that had been operational for so long and so successfully that its participants had stopped thinking of it as corruption and had begun thinking of it simply as how things worked. And at the center of it, a children's literacy foundation, named after a dedication, built by a woman who genuinely believed in what it was supposed to be. Used as a washing machine for money that moved between construction kickbacks and procurement decisions and back again in a cycle so clean that Jaewon's own financial team had stopped examining it years ago because it had never once triggered anything worth looking at. Jaewon's legal team filed in 4 jurisdictions within 20 hours of publication. In 3 of those jurisdictions, the injunctions were granted. In Nigeria, they were not, because the Lagos High Court, reviewing the application, found that the foundation of Jaewon's legal argument rested on suppressing evidence that had been transmitted through a legal entity, Adaeze Foundation, whose assets and documentation were subject to spousal disclosure law that his team had never examined because they had never considered it relevant, because they had never examined Adaeze's legal standing, because it had never occurred to 31 lawyers to look carefully at what the woman at the other end of the marble table was legally entitled to do. The Nigerian court also reviewed Bok Soon's statement and reviewed the non-disclosure agreement from the first marriage and determined, in language that occupied 4 pages of the ruling and was later cited in 2 subsequent cases, that a pattern of coerced silencing constituted a form of systematic legal abuse that fell outside the protections Jaewon's team was attempting to invoke. Shin Jae-won was not criminally charged in South Korea. He was not arrested. The 9 officials named in the investigation weathered the coverage in the way that officials in entrenched systems weather inconvenient coverage, with lawyers with patience, with the quiet institutional conviction that this too will pass. Shin Construction Group was awarded its 41st government contract in 2023. I'm telling you this because this story deserves honesty more than it deserves the ending we want it to have. The system that built Shin Jae-won did not collapse. The machine absorbed it. The machine continued. And yet, in a settlement finalized in September 2022, negotiated across 9 days of closed proceedings in a Seoul conference room, Adaeze Okonkwo-Shin received the equivalent of $31.4 million in assets. Full legal independence from every corporate structure her name had been placed within during the marriage. Complete dissolution and reconstruction of the foundation. Rebuilt from scratch, under new registration, governed by a board she selected entirely, carrying the same mission that had always been real and none of the money that had corrupted it. She was 36 years old. She had arrived in Seoul at 24 with a scholarship and an economics degree and a decision she had not allowed her mother to look at her face about. She left it with her freedom, her evidence, her foundation, and more than Jaewon's team had ever calculated she could reach. The new foundation is operational in 4 countries now. Its partner schools still receive books with handwritten dedications inside. The dedications are Emika's. Park Soo-yeon died on April 14, 2021, 6 weeks after the hospital conversation. She did not live to see the article published. She did not live to see the settlement. She did not live to see Bok Soon's statement in print. But her sister, in an interview she gave to Yemi Choi 6 months after the settlement, said that in Soo-yeon's final days she had seemed different. Not happy exactly. Not at peace in the way that phrase is used carelessly to describe dying people. Settled. The way a person looks when they have done the specific thing they stayed alive to do. She slept better those last weeks, her sister said. She stopped waking up at night. She said she felt like she could finally breathe properly, like she had surfaced. At the beginning of this story, we learned about a man who wrote dedications inside every book he owned. Not the publisher's, his own. A private message, a thread across time, between the person who held the book before and the person holding it now. Evidence that someone was here. Evidence that someone wanted you to know. Emeka Okonkwo had spent his entire professional life believing that the dedication page was where the real conversation lived. That a book without a human inscription inside, it was just paper. That what you wrote in the front cover was the most important thing you would ever write, because it was the thing that lasted beyond you. that traveled from hand to hand, that carried what you needed to say into rooms you would never enter and years you would never reach. Shin Jae-won built a $4.7 million closet. He filled it with 53 pieces of couture from 17 countries. He filled it with shoes made by hand in Paris that cost more than most people's annual salaries. He filled it with a single bag worth $380,000, sitting in a glass case in a climate-controlled room, lit from below like a sacred object. He put a biometric door in front of it. He held the only code. He believed, with the specific, total, architecturally complete certainty of a man who had designed a system for exactly this purpose, that what he contained was everything. He did not think about the books. He did not think about the dedication pages. He did not think about a retired literature teacher sitting in his study in Enugu, surrounded by 40 years of shelves, writing coordinates in children's front covers with the careful handwriting he had been perfecting his entire life. He did not think about school librarians signing for deliveries. He did not think about 712 books sitting on shelves in libraries across 3 countries, quietly holding the complete evidence of everything he needed to keep hidden. He did not think about any of it, because it happened in a world too small and too quiet and too ordinary for a man with 4.1 trillion won to think carefully about. A world of teachers, of libraries, of children learning to read. A world he had looked at his entire adult life and seen nothing significant. He built a closet for the most expensive things money could imagine. Adaeze hid the most important things in the last place he would ever look. In children's books, in library shelves, in dedication pages written in her father's handwriting across 3 countries, distributed by a foundation he funded, through a tradition he never thought to question, because it had always been there from the very beginning before any of this, because it was simply who Adaeze Okonkwo was, the daughter of a man who believed that the truest things, the things worth keeping, the things worth protecting, the things worth passing forward through time, did not belong in locked rooms. They belonged in the hands of people who were still learning what to do with them. The most powerful archive in this story was never in a penthouse. It was never behind a biometric door. It was never in a closet worth $4.7 million. It was in the hands of children who had no idea what they were holding, which is, when you sit with it long enough, exactly where the most important things have always been safest. Shin Jae-won had 4.1 trillion won and 31 lawyers and a system built over 20 years to be impenetrable. Adaeze had her father's handwriting and 712 library shelves. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Like this video. Turn on notifications, because this community is the reason that stories like this one get told at all. And there are more of them, and they are waiting. Because the next story on this channel is about a man who built a company worth $2 billion, using a name that was not his own, for 17 years. And the one employee, one woman, one desk, one Tuesday morning, who noticed that the signature on document number 1 was slightly wrong. That employee filed a report on a Thursday. She disappeared the following Sunday. She came back 14 months later. What she brought with her is why I have not been sleeping properly, and why, when you hear it, you will understand that some of the most dangerous things in the world are not weapons. They are signatures. They are dedications. They are the things we write when we believe nobody important is paying attention. I will see you there.